Belts do more than just hold up your pants. It also runs your air conditioner, power steering and alternator. Today we're going to change out the old belts. If they're in good nick, I'll keep them as spares, but at least I'll know they've got new belts on. So using the service manual, in chapter 1, which is just sort of general maintenance, here you'll see your belt arrangement, depending on which engine you've got. So this is the 1.8 litre over here. We've got one that does the power steering and the air conditioner, and then we've got another one that does the alternator. If you're going to go through the hassle of doing one, you may as well do both. As for where the belt sits, the right hand side, which is the driver's side in Australia, you see the belt goes down there, which is why I've got the wheel off. So we'll be removing these inner splash guards to access the belt. You can see the top of one of the belts here. Down there you might be able to see the alternator. And another pulley just below there. I'm going to remove these splash guards, just some bolts holding it in, some slippery clipperies. That's what they're called, slippery clipperies. I'm going to attempt to take this all out as one piece. It's a mixture of 10 and 12 mil. Otherwise there are some little clips here that you normally just pop out with a flat blade screwdriver. But these are so old, I think they're just going to break. These clips are the stupidest design in the world when you're in a hard to reach place. They should put the quarter turn locks with the Phillips head. That's not going back in because it's snapped. So with the splash guards off, you can see this is the crankshaft, there's the alternator, that's a short belt. So that sits behind the power steering belt. So if you wanted to change just that one belt, you'd have to take off the power steering belt anyway. Air conditioning compressor, up around the tensioner. So around the tensioner, up and over the power steering, back down to the crankshaft. So we need to get to the tensioner up there to get these belts off, and we're going to do both at once. It's a good idea to feel the tension on the belts, see how tight they need to be, so when you put yours back in, you know that they're in the right sort of range. This little diagram shows the 2 points that you want to put 10 kilograms of force on, and it'll give you the expected amount of deflection. So this next bit's taken me a bit to figure out, because the instructions in the book say to loosen pivot bolts and all this other sorts of stuff. So the first belt that has to come off is the air conditioning and power steering. That goes via a tensioner. The alternator belt does not. The tension is done through another clamp. So I'm going to show you both of them now, because I'm going to have to get the GoPro. I'll show you what I found. So just to recap, there's your tensioner up there. There's a 14 mil nut there, and then looking in the engine bay, it's quite difficult to see, but I did see that nut there. To verify that that's what I wanted, I had to go under the car again. So you can see in there that long bolt, the thread, that goes into here. This is the tensioner wheel on the other side. So I'm going to loosen the nut on the wheel, and then I'm going to use this bolt. I think this will release the tension on the tensioner. Now with the alternator, it is different. It doesn't go through that tensioner. So this long threaded bolt here is what's going to release the tension for the alternator belt. Bolt on the top that locks that in, so we'll have to loosen the lock bolt. The alternator needs to pivot. We'll have to use this square head here is the mounting point, which at the back you can see that nut there. So that the whole alternator pivots on that. We can loosen this pivot bolt, and that should allow enough room to get the alternator belt off, and we'll just have to tighten that back up after the tension is put back on. That will allow the alternator to pivot back in when we start moving the tension lock nut up top. So it might be a bit hard to see what's going on here. Just going to release tension. Not loosening that off, 14 mil. Now I'm going to use this tension bolt down here. Might be easier from underneath, but I'm going to loosen that. So you can feel the tension's getting a lot looser already. Alright, I lost audio here. Basically, got the belt off, checking the code on the belt to make sure it matches the new one, and just inspecting the condition of it. It looks pretty good, so I'm going to use this as a spare. I'll still put the new one on, but I'm not going to throw the old one out. We're on the alternator belt now. I'm just going to loosen this pivot bolt before I go to the tensioner and start loosening the lock nut on the tensioner and the tensioner itself. This is 14mm. So next I'm going to loosen that lock nut and then the tensioner, and then I'll be able to get that belt off. Alright, so the alternator belt's off. Again, pretty good condition. I'll keep it as a spare. Put the new one on, pivot the alternator down, tension it up. So I've slipped the alternator belt back on. Now I'm just going to take up tension with the tension bolt. What we're looking for is the right amount of tension that you can't actually twist the belt anymore. Because my belts were in good condition, I'm just looking for a similar tension to as I found them. So the alternator pivot bolt is loose. Just gonna hook this back over here. Basically, any span of the belt, you shouldn't be able to twist it further than 90 degrees. After we've done this up to the correct tension, we will tighten this, which will lock it in place, and then we'll go down and tighten the pivot bolt. Alright guys, we've tensioned that up. It takes quite a lot of tension. There's no torque settings for it. You need a tool to measure force in Newton meters when pressing on a certain point of the belt. But I have roughly the same amount of threads showing on the tensioner as I did before with a new belt, and it feels the same. I can't twist the belt at any point past about 90 degrees. What we do have is torque settings for the alternator pivot bolt. That is a 14mm to do up at 44 Newton meters. 2 bolts in here, just a correction, they were 12mm for the alternator. Everything else is 14. So now we're putting the power steering belt on around the tensioner, and then obviously you've got your air conditioning and your crankshaft. So that's on now. About to loosen this a bit, which brings the tensioner closer to the front of the car, reducing this gap that has to go around now. So now we need to tighten this until we have the right tension. And after I tighten that, I'll nip this little lock nut up on the front. And that's job done. Girls love a good belt. Once you change your belts out, you'll get heaps of comments about the lack of squealing in your car. Oh my God, your car doesn't squeal. These are fucking shit.